Alrighty, we're about 2 minutes in. I appreciate everyone joining today. This is the final session of our web series around Microsoft Azure Sentinel. My name is Rich Lilly. I'm a partner and associate director with Netrix out of our Chicago office. I help run our cloud infrastructure and security team and all around Microsoft Security SME. So we've had a very fruitful last two sessions. We started with kind of the initial introduction to Azure Sentinel at a high level. Our last session, we went deep into security orchestration, automated response, and playbooks. And in this final session, we are going to dig into kind of the language that owns and runs all of Sentinel, Custo. So today is going to be fairly heavily focused in on Custo as it pertains to working with the raw data that gets ingested. Also, how to do some advanced hunting with that data. And then in addition, we're going to leverage that core data in order to produce workbooks and dashboards. And certainly one of the things I get asked most commonly is, well, what is the difference between a workbook and a dashboard? And should I consume that via Power BI? Should I consume that via an Azure workbook? Should that be a dashboard in Azure? So we'll be covering some of the key differences in some of those today. As usual, if there are any questions, I will try to take a break about halfway through as well as at the end to see if there are any questions. Feel free to chime in, add those, and we will try to address those as we go. So just like the last couple, we'll start with just a couple of very quick slides. Much like the most previous webinar, this is going to be almost all demonstration and hands-on. So again, just kind of setting that foundation for those that either couldn't make the previous webinars or just kind of reinforcing some of the topics from our original presentation. So we kicked off this web series by talking about some of the fundamentals, and one of the fundamental challenges that many SOCs face today is specifically around volume of events, maintenance, and really the ability to be able to pivot across the data. And we're going to be kind of addressing some of those today in terms of using that data to our benefit. From a Sentinel perspective, again, we talk about kind of that NIST-like capability or NIST-like alignability. So collect, detect, investigate, respond. Today, we're going to be focusing heavily on the detect, investigate, and respond. Again, mostly working with that raw data. So again, we'll talk about what that data looks like when it comes in, what it even looks like if we're pulling in custom data sets as well. So I'm going to show a really cool solution that Microsoft built to pull in all of the data from the Office 365 management APIs, even that data that's not present in the default connector, and how I've actually used that to create some custom views and dashboards and consume that data in a unique fashion. As far as stitching all the data together, the more the merrier. So we'll be working with a couple of different raw data sets today. So we will be working with some of the pre-integrated data connectors, such as Office Activity and Azure AD, but also I am going to show a use case where we pull in some of that custom data set as well. That is really it. Again, really want to just quickly set the foundation. Let's pivot over into our 90% demo session today. So, if everyone recalls, this is kind of one of the many Sentinel portals that I work out of, and as kind of a precursor to this stand-up, we've gone ahead and configured a variety of different data connectors. If you remember from the first fundamental session, that connection is pretty straightforward. So whether it comes down to, say, Office 365 down here, and we want to go bring that data in, it's really about doing that initial plumbing with the correct rights. And then essentially that is bringing in the data. Now, what we didn't dig extremely deep into is what it actually means once that data comes in. So let's go fast forward and take a quick peek at what that looks like over here in logs. Now in logs, this is essentially a raw view of all the events that are coming in across the tenant. For instance, if I wanted to see kind of the breadth of that data that's coming in, I could go look at the time range of 30 minutes and I could do something like search star. Really inefficient to do this, but again, for demonstration purposes, this will give you an idea of what it looks like in the most raw form for the different pieces of data to come in. You'll see likely data here from Office, from Azure Active Directory, from my Edge firewalls, and there will likely easily be over 10,000 rows. So that's why it'll take it a second here to return that data set. Bottom line, though, that data is being fed in, and on the left-hand side, what you're going to see is this will correlate back to different tables where that data is housed. Now, if you work with an existing SIM solution or you're familiar with like any of the Splunk logarithms, ARC sites, really the overall structure of the data is going to be fundamentally the same. And there you can see that query just finished running here. There's some additional insight metrics that looks like they're here. What I'm looking for down here is all the different pieces that come into Azure Sentinel, and these will come into their own respective tables. So for instance, if I want to go look at sign-in logs, we can go look at sign-in logs, and that'll give me the last 30 minutes of our sign-in logs. We can see the depth of detail we get, just like you would see out of those Azure AD sign-in logs that are present under the Azure AD portal. You also note a couple different things here as well. So when I actually look at some of these fields, this is really just unpacking JSON. So when I see kind of this right arrow concept here, I can do things like expand the field, and then maybe I want to move that up so it's more prevalent in my data return. So what I'll do here is I'll go back up. I'll go ahead and extend this field by clicking the 3 little dots. And now I've made that city easily visible in the return of my results versus having to dig into every single event. So now I can see all these different events based on an extended field that was in this much bigger query. And you can do that for any of the fields that you want to unpack here as well. So again, you can see different items here around authentication time, around conditional access, constant evaluation, success or error code, etc. But again, just a really good depth of information. That's a really easy way to expand columns that I don't necessarily feel comfortable trying to write out the parse JSON to extract that. Really, really super easy to just simply go up here, click the 3 little dots, and then extend that column. So again, fun little fact there when you're working with that data set. And again, we look at other factors here too. So when we start looking at kind of the tables themselves, you'll note that there are common fields across all of them. So from a formatting perspective, you'll note that I don't see like a lot of blank spaces or objects or names, but that would change if I'm trying to query data across multiples. So this is really where it starts to be important to understand what you're querying and how to bring that data fundamentally together in one place. In addition to the ones that are under Sentinel here, depending on your tenant, you may also see different solutions. So for instance, I've got this anti-malware solution that comes in super handy up here. That'll spit out the protection status of all my machines. You can see here, our threat status rank and protection status, and if real-time protection is turned on. So there's definitely additional data points that are valuable from other solutions that are actually in log analytics. They can also add additional context for you as well. I will point out that not every data connector will drop data into the Sentinel connector here. You also note there's going to be quite a few other ones down here. So for instance, Azure Sentinel, the new behavioral-based analytics actually drops into its own unique table. And you'll see the same thing for like DNS analytics and a handful of others. So don't be concerned if you see others there. They won't all show up under Sentinel, but these are all, again, just different data sources that I can work with. What I will highlight as well is that when we start looking at things like sign-in logs, so let's just go take this as a quick example. And again, I'm not going to write anything other than sign-in logs, and I'm just adjusting the date and time up here to be 30 minutes, so we're not returning a lot of records, but instead we have about 201 here. One of the things is if you're not extremely comfortable working with Kusto, which I'm going to get into kind of a 101 on the operators and the language here in just a minute, is you can always go back over here over into filter. And actually, this will build a dynamic filter view for everything that's actually being returned in the system. So again, let's say I'm not very comfortable with working with Kusto, but I know that I want to get all of the sign-in log events for, we'll say, the Microsoft Teams web client. I'll go ahead and hit apply and run there, and you can see it actually went ahead and wrote that for me, which is a pretty simple where statement. So it's just a pipe where app display name equals exactly, this is what double equals is, Microsoft Teams web client. And if I want to, I can even go down and look at, sourcing that by IP address. I can look at also filtering that based on conditional access status. So again, you don't have to be a Kusto wizard to be able to work with this data. And again, you can also use this nice handy little filter up here to work with and consume that data as well. So again, very basic. A couple other things I'll point out here as well as far as just working within this view. And again, if you've worked with log analytics before, this should look familiar, or even app insights, this should look and feel pretty familiar. One of the most important things to note is the date slicer here. You want to make sure to pick the time frame in which you want to evaluate. You can also set this in your query, which I'll get to in just a little bit. But if you're just getting started here, you'll probably want to kind of interact with it in the most basic form, which is this up here. Some other things to note on this page as a whole. I can save queries out into essentially an area that are shared or distributed in the tenant itself. So if we go over here into Query Explorer, you'll actually see that I've got a whole bunch of different queries saved for things that I do on a regular basis. And these may be things I'm working on, or these may be things that I am constantly tuning or evaluating, or I want to get in store. So I'll get into some examples here in just a little bit, but if I was to save this right here, I can then go over to, whatever that folder is, and then open up that item, and then voila, there's our query. Again, good for having references on hand. I'll also point out that you can copy a link to the query text, or even the results very easily right out of this button. So again, just some handy facts here. Also, if you're able to get this query concise enough, so if we go back to our scenario where we're looking for, Teams web client sign-ins, try that again really quick. One thing that's really handy here when you're running under that log section in Sentinel is you can go up here to create a new alert rule and actually create an Azure Sentinel alert directly from that query. So in this case, if I wanted to, not that it's a great example, but I would, put something like Teams web client used, put my description in, my tactics, my severity, and again, voila, there I've got a nice alert that's created directly out of the context of that event. So again, really handy to be able to pivot over directly into that view. Let's go back to that again. Just a couple other things here as well. Keyboard shortcuts. Keyboard shortcuts are your friend. When you're working within Kusto here, Shift-Enter will run the query of the lines that are selected. Now note, if I have something like this, which I can have multiple lines, these are two separate queries. So when I click anywhere in this line, so whether it's this one or this one, and I just Shift-Enter, you note that it's going to run that Office activity one, versus up here, if I just select any line that's of that same string of query, then I would go in and just run the sign-in logs. So again, keyboard shortcuts will absolutely be your friend here. I barely use the actual run button in the portal anymore. Also highlight that on the right-click command. You also see different formatting options here as well. There's language reference, there's community asks. You can also look at the whole command palette as a whole. Not going to get deeply into that today, but no, there are other options. So not a lot of folks realize you can right-click on this and get additional context. We can also export this as well. So in this case, if I want to export the results, I could export all the data here, or I could export just what's displayed, or I could export that as an M query, which I'll get to in a little bit here. I can also pin the results of this to an Azure dashboard. So if this is extremely important for me and I want to see this data when I open the Azure portal every day, I can go up and pin that. And there's also an option here that's format query, and this is essentially a prettify of the query. Yes, that's a technical term. And essentially what that will do is it will make that pretty and make sure that there's line separations where needed and make sure the query context is right. So you'll note there that just dropped that into a separate line after the pipe command. So again, really kind of basic foundational stuff. But again, great places to get started. Two other things I'll point out on the bottom here. So down here, we have a couple different options. So anytime I run a query, I get a distinct, an explicit result, which in most cases is going to be a grid view or a table out here. I can also visualize that data as well by just clicking this chart button, and then I can choose the factors I want for and the type of graph. So in this case, let's say that I wanted to do a line chart, and I wanted to do this based on tenant ID, and some really bad example for this log set, but again, I can easily create graphs. I actually prefer doing this a different way, which I'm going to show in a little bit. The other most important thing about this view, and literally the most important, is this right here. By default, all queries will show in Universal Time Coordinated, or UTC. If you want to show that in your local time, I recommend changing that to local time. Most security operations centers that I work with, especially if you have a global organization, will end up working in UTC from a standards perspective. But again, if you have mostly regionalized, you may choose to work in your regional timestamp. Again, at this point, I mostly do UTC translation in my head for the most part. I'll also point out there are some other factors on here too. You can see the length of the query and the process data and other data sets here as well. Again, not going to get deeply into this today, but again, just some good metrics. So again, just a really quick overview of kind of the overall page here from a logging perspective. Let's actually dig in to some specific examples next. So this, let's first talk about Kusto. So if you have ever worked with Splunk before, or you've ever worked with SQL, Kusto is extremely easy to pick up. In fact, if you were to go out and search for Microsoft Kusto SQL or Microsoft Kusto Splunk, Microsoft has actually written a cheat sheet for both of those. In fact, the Splunk one should be there, but I'll find it here. There we go. Really handy guides here that will help you transition that knowledge you already have today from functions and operators from Splunk or from SQL to Kusto. So again, really handy little cheat sheets there. You also notice there's some good lessons in here. So if you haven't been through any of these before, I've got my own set of lessons I've built, but again, some really great places to learn. I will also heavily plug Pluralsight. They offer a free 8-hour course. You don't have to have a subscription anymore, I believe, for at least this one on Kusto. And it is a fantastic curated course with Microsoft. I believe it's this bottom one here, which is exploring data using Kusto. So again, if you're just getting started with any of these, great places to kind of help uplift your learning of Kusto. All right, so what I want to start with from the data perspective, because I know this can be a little overwhelming, but really the data is your friend here. The data is really the most powerful part of Sentinel. Again, when we talked the other day about kind of where a SIM fits, it's really about aggregating the logs to one place, but more specifically correlating different event types to each other. Those become extremely important for how you do proactive threat detection and potentially remediation. So when we talk about that data, everything you do within Sentinel is backed by a query. So whether it's an alert, like we talked through the other day or last week, whether it be an analytic / alert, or I'm sorry, whether it be a workbook, whether it be a dashboard, all of that is backed by Kusto. So one of the most important places to start is with some foundations. So I've got 10 very quick examples here that are going to help you understand the most basic operators in Sentinel. This is not meant to be a 400 level course for being able to write string concatenation and max argument. There's some actually great examples out there in Microsoft's GitHub repo. I will show some today as well, but let's start with some of the basics, then we'll talk about building on top of this foundation. So at the foundational level, one of the most important factors is count. So you can see here I'm working within the security events table, which is, as it sounds, all the security event logs in this case. And when I do a count for the last 24 hours, this is going to do exactly what it sounds like. It's going to give me a count of all of the events for the last 24 hours from all of my servers that are onboarded into Sentinel. I ran this earlier. I happen to know there's a couple 100,000, so it may take a second. So this is also important to know because when it comes to returning results in the UI, you can only return 10,000 results in the portal today. Via an API, you can do 100,000, and you can also obviously write, you can also leverage pagination and concatenate those as well. My recommendation is try to write your query as best as optimized as possible. The larger data sets you work with, like what I'm doing right now, the more difficult and the longer it's going to take to query all those results and essentially do what it's doing now. In this case, it's doing that count. We'll take that down to 30 minutes and rerun it just to get that result a little bit quicker. So in this case, again, that gives us a total count of the events, and you can always append an entire query with pipe space account, and that will give you the total values returned on that. So again, I could write this really crazy query, and I could just say, hey, show me the 5, or it comes up as 5 unique events. I'm not quite sure what's going on with the portal here. But again, that count function becomes extremely handy and how you use that. I'm gonna try that once more here. May just be my internet or my luck here for my demos. All right, we'll move on to the next one. So again, count, just showing you this count. The next one is take. So take will return a finite amount of rows. In this case, by just adding pipe take 5, that will just take any 5 events and display them back in the UI. There we go, the search works now. The biggest point to note about this is that that will not return the results in a specific order, just any 5. So be aware that, if you've got specific formatting challenges, et cetera, it may not be a good representation of all of those. You can also do things like get schema to get that if you're looking to get more of the formatting. But again, if you're just really starting to work with that data set, take is a really great, easy way to just foundationally work with that data. So let's expand upon that a little bit more. So now we want to use project. And project you will use all the time. Project is probably one of the most common operators used. And really the purpose of project is to select a subset of the columns. So for instance, if we go here and we look at all the event detail that's in a security event, like you would see in a local event viewer, you can see a bunch of data. You can see the kind of system level logging on the tenant ID and the time generated. Down here, we see the event data XML, then we see the event ID and the file hash and time collected and a whole bunch of details, right? I don't necessarily care about every single one of those fields. So what this allows us to do is project out fields that we really care about. So in this case, let's go ahead and run this query again. I'm just hitting Shift Enter, and voila, there we return just what we care about: the time generated, the account name, which there's none in the 5 it pulled, the computer, the event ID, and the activity. So again, allows me to take out just really what I care about. The next that you'll use very often is going to be where. So where is essentially a filter. If you've ever worked with any programmatic language, where should look and feel pretty familiar to you, whether it's PowerShell or again, Splunk, SQL, etc. Maybe a select in SQL, obviously. So in this case, this allows us to say, we only want to return the events and the fields that match this. So in this case, what I'm doing is I'm going to go ahead and run this. And we want to go ahead and return events that equal 4688. Now, one of the most important things here is this right here. Double equals. A double equals is an exact match of that, meaning uppercase, lowercase, numeric symbols, etc. That's important to note because if I had something like PowerShell that without the P and the S capitalized and I did an equals equals, that would do an exact match on that, which would not necessarily give me the data I want. And actually, we can see that here by changing this contains to an equals. So note right now, with the way the query was, I'm looking for the event ID 4688 and command line to have PowerShell exactly spelled and case sensitive how it is. If I'm looking at the command line down here, actually this will still this may or may not return it, but this will look for this command line to equal PowerShell in this case, and that should return no results as I would expect. So again, in this case, what we're doing is we're saying, hey, check that event ID and check that the command line field contains the word PowerShell, which it does down here. So again, just different ways in which you can use that. I should also point out that anytime you work in Custo, you have IntelliSense. So when I'm working with something, I can automatically get things like, what other options do I have? Do I have ands? Do I have ors? What am I going to type after where? So again, I can go down here and you'll see different examples, and it's going to automatically populate the rows of data for me. It's going to then give me the different sub operators here. So again, I can start to do starts with, ends with, prefix, etc. So again, even if you're not extremely comfortable working in the language out at the outset, it's very nice and guided for you to get comfortable with it. So again, rerunning this query again, we're going to, again, taking event ID where this and where the command line contains PowerShell, we're going to take 5 of those and we're going to project out the specific fields, right? So kind of putting a lot of the pieces together that we covered up here. So the next is I want to be able to sort. So everything here is exactly the same except for this middle field, which is we want to be able to sort by time generated. So in this case, we are sorting by a specific field. In this case, we are sorting by the time, but that could also be based on the computer, based on the activity, etc. So for instance, if I go ahead and run this query, we'll see that from the top down, that is in fact the most recent to the oldest record we have. If I wanted to, I can simply change this field though, and I can change it to computer. And now you'll see it will be sorted by descending computer name. Well, terrible example in this case because they're all the same. But again, you get the point. Allows us to really kind of work with how we want to sort the data. The next one is going to be top. I think pretty self-explanatory, but this will return the first X amount of records or N amount of records in the specific columns. So in this case, this will essentially return very similar data as the one above, but in this case, it's going to have one less operator on it. So again, if we go back and run that, everything is pretty much the same here, but in this case, you'll see that we're going to pull in just the most recent 5 based on the command line, excuse me. So again, just another way to work with that data. Now extend. Extend allows us to take an existing piece of data and mold it to what we want. So an extend, actually, in the most basic function, you could use to rename a column. You could also use an extend in order to, in this case, you can see, do some math or some subtraction of different functions. So in this case, we're actually shifting over to a different data set here to office activity. But what this is doing is saying, hey, look at all office activity. Give me the top 5 by record type and show that as a column of duration, which is the start time minus the time generated, and then give me those specific fields. So we'll just run that really quickly here. So there, what we get is well, exactly that. Within the office activity, if we actually just go back up here really quick, if I just run this part, you'll note that in the return data, there are going to be different pieces here. And what this essentially was doing is looking at start underscore time. So again, we're taking the start time minus the time generated, and that's going to give us how long that record ran. Again, some very simple in-query math here. What's interesting to me right away is I see, events, this one running for, 14022, which was an add to group. Another one was add secure to link. And I can maybe start to look at things like, well, where was that duration longer than, 6 minutes or 10 minutes? Or where did I see a deviation in that where there's a huge spike in events? Again, you can start to just, understand how you could consume and use this data. Summarize. So what summarize allows us to do is aggregate different groups of rows. So in this case, it allows us to take these different fields and visualize them in a meaningful way based on their attributes. So in this case, we're going back again to security events. And what we're looking for is we're actually looking for all of the event count by activity. So in this case, the activity is representative of a field. So if you go back here and we just look at, again, the raw data to kind of see where it came from, we just look at a security event, you'll see a whole bunch of different data here. So we'll see, all these different pieces. There's event data, but specifically, we want to be able to get the unique count of each one of these type of events. And I'm, going to be particularly looking for trends in many cases. Sorry, I'll move that take 5. So, okay, again, looks good. There's 18 unique records in the last 4 hours that have been returned. I could either go click on this and sort or filter, but remember, if I want to use some of the knowledge I mentioned before, I can also do a sort by event count descending. And now that'll give me the top events that have been logged. So again, I would expect to see these, but again, I would be looking for things that may be out of the norm. Other things that we're going to get to in just a few minutes, though, as well as I can also do things like render these as bar charts. And now I can see that in a visual representation. That's kind of a sneak peek for what we'll show in just a few minutes here. Just a couple of more here, and then I'll check back for questions. So this one is also actually leveraging an aggregation function. So in this case, we want to leverage a D count to get a little bit more specific on the events, maybe per object or per device. And this actually allows us to show a couple different pieces. So one is going to be each of the columns by the computed expression, and then the specific row based on value. So this is going to be handy in many cases where I maybe want to get this based on multiple distinct properties. So maybe I want to get that based on like unique objects by device. In this case, you can see it's by activity and event ID. There's different ways you can work with that function or operator, excuse me. Bin. Bin is one of my favorites as well, mostly because I look at a lot of data over the course of time. So bin allows us, just like you were to work within grouping in Excel, allows us to take data sets and bin them based on different properties, whether it be a second, a millisecond, a day, a week, a month, a year, etc. So again, going back to kind of our foundational query we were working with before, this is going to essentially get the security events, and it's going to get all the security events between these two times, and it's going to go ahead and summarize the event counts, by day. So it's going to bin them by day. So if we actually go down here, you can see that it's actually gone ahead and done that logic for me. So this said, hey, how many security events are there? Again, if we just build this out really quick, we'll go ahead and just run that. It'll probably return quite a few results. So this would just give me all results across all days, but this one would specifically give me the specific results binned or counted by day. And then again, just like I talked about earlier, I can even take this out into a view like a time chart, and voila, I've now got the events over time as a part of this. And that's actually a bit of a sneak peek into what we've already showed once or twice here, but render allows you to take out the raw data into a visual representation. So in this case, what we're doing is we're essentially taking and aggregate a lot of the things we've shown thus far, and we're going to go ahead and display that data as a column chart. So in this case, we're looking at all the security events, we're getting the duration, we're summarizing the accounts, getting an average, sorting by mid, descending, where the event account is greater than 1800, and then projecting those fields and showing them as a column chart. So again, you can see here the different events that were logged as a part of this, and there were 12 returned results. Now again, without that render in there, you'll see that we're just going to return essentially those results, but that render really allows us to take that into a visual. Very similarly, this is a time chart, which we already briefly showed, but this is a great example actually of what not to do. Note that I'm binning this at 1 day, but only showing the last day. So that data, that rendering is not extremely rich. So in this case, I'm going to just set that up to 2 days, or I may set it to 7 days, and you'll see that I actually get that point over time. Or again, I could even get down, and if I wanted to, under that 24 hours, or we'll say 4, I can actually bin that per minute for the last 4 hours. So again, if you've ever worked in Power Query, Excel, SQL, Splunk, this should look and feel pretty familiar to everyone. Again, these are all very common operators, and I will highly plug the Microsoft Docs and Pluralsight to help kind of get your feet, off the ground for this. I'm going to go ahead and stop presenting for 1 second. I'm going to check for any questions, and then I'm going to keep things moving on. Yep, and there is a question in the chat somewhat related to what we're talking about, which is can we consume logs from Cisco devices, firewalls, routers, switches? Yes, you can. We went through that, I think, in the Fundamentals 1 session, and there is essentially a collector on premises that will accept the logs from Cisco syslog, and then accept those in, and there's pre-built parsers for Cisco already. So fortunately, a lot of what I'm showing today is you have to build some of the logic. In things like Cisco, for instance, you do not. All right, I'm going to go ahead and move on since there were no more questions. So again, kind of the 101 type stuff here. So let's actually talk about putting some of this into practicality, and I'm going to kind of go into a little bit more advanced scenario very quickly here. So one of the things that as we worked through with Sentinel, and this has come a long way over the times, is that when I started looking at what Microsoft had in their built-in connector for Office activity, it was pretty standard. At one point, it was really only Exchange and SharePoint, and then Teams got released a couple of months ago in preview. I can never remember because we're in the private previews. But when we start looking at this data, it wasn't everything I wanted, right? So if we actually go back and look at what Microsoft is pulling in into their Office activity table, again, putting some of our querying skills to use here, I was getting some, but at one point I wasn't getting any Teams data, but it wasn't necessarily everything I wanted. So, for me, that was a bit of an issue. And, what I can see is, very quickly here is I can go run a summarize, and I can look at summarize count by, we'll do operation. And so what I quickly noticed is I just wasn't getting all of the data that I knew was in that raw API. So I'd done a little bit of research, talked to some of the Microsoft team, and voila, they had actually gone ahead and built a solution to be able to get that raw data from the Office 365 management APIs. Now, for anyone that has any other SIM solution today, this should look and feel familiar because these APIs are what you use to connect Splunk or Logarithm or ArcSight or whatever your preferred platform of choice is today. The nice thing about this is this this data connector that Microsoft built. It's not in the portal. It's from GitHub only. We'll actually deploy an Azure function to read the management APIs and actually get the full enriched set of data. So very, very simple and easy to deploy. The instructions are in here. I'm not going to go through them today. But the nice thing is there's a couple prereqs to set up, and then essentially you hit deploy to Azure, and you can exactly what that sounds like. It'll automatically pull in the ARM template and deploy that as a data connector to Azure with some of the prerequisites you need to fill out. Now, I bring this up because if anyone's ever worked with the APIs before, you'll note that the APIs are a bit odd for O365. So when I query the management API, I return essentially bundles of data that I then have to call and then return the segments of JSON from that. So it's essentially a call within a call. So Microsoft in this runbook actually handles all of that logic of looking at that. And again, we talked a bit about playbooks in our last session, but this is a great example of how a playbook can be used. So in this case, you can see here that it's a recurring job every 5 minutes. It queries the API. It goes ahead and parses the JSON and then gets those additional fields, parses those, and then sends it as essentially a record into Sentinel, essentially giving me much more enriched content. So again, those are kind of the prereqs coming directly from there. Let's look at the output of what that looks like. And this is where we start to really work with the data. So when I look at the O365 raw API, I'm just going to go for the last 30 minutes here, because there's, again, quite a bit of data, 807 records. You can see that it's not really formatted. And the reason is because I've got logs coming in from SharePoint and OneDrive and Teams, Yammer, O365 Advanced Threat Protection, etc. So I have literally, potentially hundreds of different columns that don't match up in data. So that presents me a problem. That problem is I need to be able to parse the data the way I need it and the way I need to interact with it. So we just take like this top record here, for instance. This appears like it's an event from Office Advanced Threat Protection. Cool. Well, that's great, but I can see that nothing here really gives me any context around that data set. Again, because there's too many fields that are too broadly spread across. And by the way, if you work with another third-party SIM today, this is all they're doing in the back end is to kind of prettify this data for the most part. So, one of the things I did when I was first looking at this is I said, well, hey, I know that the API has a whole bunch of different workloads. So let's just go ahead and take a look at what's in those workloads. I'm going to use this operator I didn't talk about earlier called distinct, which just gives me the distinct value for that column. And I want to go look at the distinct workload _S. Okay, well, that's pretty cool. All right, so I can see that in the last 30 minutes, and I'm going to go up a little bit here to 24 hours, we'll see the different types of workloads that I'm gleaning information from via the APIs. And again, this should look and feel familiar if you ever worked with the APIs before. So here's some auto investigation response investigations, Azure Active Directory, endpoint for some of the new endpoint stuff that's in DOP, Microsoft Forms, Stream, OneDrive, Quarantine, etc. Whole bunch of data there. So the problem is, well, how do I really manipulate and work with this data in a way that I want? So one of the things I know, and this was kind of my approach prior to Microsoft releasing their solution, is I know that I wanted to be able to get Teams data. And that was, for me, that was a gap. So I know that I want to get all the data for Microsoft Teams. So we're going to go up here and we're going to go ahead and say where workload equals Microsoft Teams. Again, not really cleanly formatted because we're feeding in a whole bunch of different data and there's different fields and properties that just are not normalized. So again, if we look at this event, for instance, we can see from one of the gentlemen with the metrics, there's a team session started. Giving some pretty basic detail about the client IP, etc. So that's a really good start. So what I know is I know that there's some specific fields that I need to address. So what you can do with this, and this would be similar if you have any custom solution, right? I know this is Office 365, but let's take a step back for a minute and just say this is ingesting an API that's formatted in JSON, regardless of whether it's coming from SAP or Microsoft or ServiceNow or some other security API you have access to. this is foundationally where a lot of the data connectors come from, is being able to correctly ingest and correctly parse the logic. Behind the scenes, a data connector is really just essentially a function or a playbook and a parser. Really, that's what you see when you add a data connector. So we're essentially building our own here. So, let's say that I went ahead and did a lot of this legwork and I said, hey, I want to get more enriched data around teams. And again, for anything that I'm talking about today, I have gone ahead and put this up on my GitHub repository as well. So you'll find workbooks, parsers, and some Power BI dashboards, which I'll get to in just a little bit here. And this is really doing is it's normalizing some of those fields and making them look prettier. So if I go back here and I look at those really kind of blank fields, they don't really tell me anything. What I'm doing is I'm extracting some of those fields and then I'm making them look better, right? So they're originally called workload_s for string, or they're going to be a Boolean, so they'd be _b. And essentially all I'm doing is just making some of this look pretty. So now if we actually look at the parser, that's actually now got all the relevant fields that I care about in relation to teams. So again, we can see some different scenarios here. Now, what's also great is I can save this as a function and I can call this anytime I want. So again, functions are extremely helpful. I'm just going to boil it down and say functions are a way to programmatically work with a set of operators, or in my case, parsers. So now that I've saved this as a Teams data function, which you can do here by going to Query Explorer, and then actually you can go up here, you can go to save, and then you can choose to save this as a function. I can now just write Teams data, just like if I was a native table with Microsoft, and guess what? Now I've got that same data set that's already been normalized based on the context of that data. So this comes in really, really handy. And again, when you think about things that are coming in from third-party solutions, or you think about they're coming in from those custom data sources I talked about earlier, this is really the first steps to be able to bring that data in a nice cohesive manner. Otherwise, every single time I have to go right in the beginning of my query, O365 API underscore custom log, the workload underscore s, and I have to write this entire project string. Not really viable at all. So again, instead, now I can just go over here and I could say Teams data where operation contains started. And I don't have to worry about any of that formatting. Voila. So again, really, really handy as far as how you can leverage those. And again, behind the scenes, this is what a lot of the parsing logic, et cetera, is as well. All right, so we've got about 15 minutes left. So let's go ahead and move on to workbooks. So again, I talk about everything really being backed by Kusto Query. So that also includes workbooks. Apologize there, just went and closed the wrong tab. So when we talk about workbooks, Microsoft also has their GitHub repository with workbooks. In addition, I will plug some of the ones that I'm going to be demoing today I've built as well, to see some, one for Teams here and data loss prevention. And before Microsoft released theirs, I had an Office ATP one. So again, just some different examples here. But a workbook is essentially taking multiple queries and making them into multiple visualizations. Now, last time we briefly talked about what it looks like to bring in a workbook from the Microsoft gallery. So we can see a whole bunch of different ones here. But what I want to do is I want to go ahead and create a new one. So let's go ahead and create a new workbook. And you'll see that Microsoft starts you off with a pretty foundational template. So in my case, I want to go ahead and edit that right away. And we want to go ahead and add, I'm just going to keep everything in here default for now. I want to go ahead and add a query. So in this query, I want to be able to get all of the Office activity by distinct workload. And for some reason, that's not letting me autocomplete. Let me just kill this and add it again. So in this case, we want to go ahead and get Teams data. So I'm just changing the context a little bit here. So so this is essentially what that looks like in a visualization. And I can literally just go over here and hit done editing. And in the most basic form, this is now a living, breathing dashboard where I've got that graph. However, I can also do other things with this data. And I can write full queries or copy them over here. But I can also do things like, that render command directly in here, or I can go open the visualization and look at, graphing this out. So let's just say that I wanted to do teams data, summarize counts by operation. So if you remember that summarize command, and I want to be able to bin that by time generated over 1 day, 1 hour will do, since it's set to a day. And up top, you can see some of the similar things here. So there's my time range, which is 24 hours. There's the tenant I'm querying. And in the most basic form, this will give me that data. But up here, I can also take this. I can take this out to any one of the different time charts or bar charts, et cetera, I want. So there is now my visualization. So now if I hit done, you'll see that that is now just a core graphical representation of that query. Now, the nice thing is as a living, breathing workbook, anytime I refresh that workbook, the data is refreshed on demand. So it allows me to get that data in, nearly as real time as I can get that from Sentinel. I can also set other properties as well, so I don't have them in here. I can set drop downs and tabs, and again, a lot of other examples here, many of which I won't have time to get to today. But again, this is really, how the visualizations operate. And again, there's also text-based formatting, et cetera. Now, behind the scenes, what this really is an ARM template, and I can actually leverage this and redeploy to other customer tenants, much like what I've done in my GitHub repository or Microsoft has done in theirs. You'll see that these are really just JSON files behind the scenes. So again, that's really what you see in the back end, even though I've worked mostly in the UI to create them. So let's actually go to one that's built out a little bit more here. So let's go ahead and look at a Office Advanced Threat Protection workbook that I've created. Sorry, under my workbooks. And this is out on my GitHub repository. You can find my GitHub repository at richlilly 2004 under Azure Sentinel. So this is a workbook that I completely built, and you can see it's sourced out of our internal subscription the last 24 hours. If I wanted to, I can edit and change the visuals or do whatever I want to manipulate the content. Also, you can choose to have buttons on here, like pivot over to the raw data. I don't have that on any of these. You can see I'm working in different views. So my goal in creating this was to kind of replicate the access that someone would have to the dashboards of Office 365 Advanced Threat Protection without giving them access to that portal, because that's usually a barrier of entry. But instead, I want to be able to get that programmatically. So in this case, I'm replicating those main dashboards that show us the verdict over time. You can see here, again, I can hover over, get the different values over the course of time. We're picking based on detection methods. Here is a slightly different view in a pie chart, et cetera. And then I'm not going to show the entire list here, but again, I'm rendering out who are our top senders, who are our top sender IPs, who are our top recipients, and then even publishing the raw data at the bottom there that I can go search. So again, the goal is I don't have to pivot to another portal, but I can access that data directly. And again, this is a workbook you can import, just like you go import one from the Microsoft galleries as well. A slightly different example as well, but on the same accord. I also built one for Teams. This tended to gain a lot of traction, mostly because people are very concerned about security in Teams. Now, what I love about this is I try to use a whole bunch of different views in this. So those views relate back to activity. Specifically, we're looking at kind of user-based activity. We're also looking at admin activity. We're also looking at external user access, which again, that graph comes in extremely handy there. And then also we can see different suspicious user scenarios as well. So I've built some queries. If we actually go look at them, they're looking for things that are suspect. And then I would review these on a regular basis, or hopefully also have them tagged for alerts. But again, suspicious doesn't always quantify it as something that's always going to be bad. And in this case, wrong one here. You can see that this is one that is looking for anomalous organizations. This is actually really cool. So, we start getting into kind of the depth of Kusto queries, but this is actually a great one from one of the Microsoft guys or girls. And what this is doing is it's saying, hey, look at the last 14 days of Teams access. Give me every unique suffix, domain suffix that's connected. And then let's look at the last, anything further than the last day. And then tell me where there's an anomaly. So where are there new organizations that are accessing Teams from an external's perspective that have never accessed it before? Now, fortunately, We don't see any data in here currently, so we're not, there are none. But again, there's other examples up here that I have too, where we look for when was an external user added and removed within a short amount of time, or when was a user made an owner of multiple teams within a short amount of time, or where did we see successful logins and failures from different IPs. This is really, again, these workbooks become extremely powerful, and you can use them, in any way and shape you want. And workbooks are really focused, for the most part, on like single focus solutions. The other cool thing you can do with this is we can also go ahead and pin these different workbook views into an Azure dashboard as well. So one of the things that you may not realize, if we go back here actually into just one of the Microsoft workbooks here. So I will go over into, actually we'll go into the Office ATP one that I built here. One of the things that people look at right away when they see this is they'll go and say, well, great, I can go up and hit pin here and that'll give me my unique curated view. But additionally, there are also, you also have the ability of pinning the unique objects in here as well, so that I can go through and then make this an Azure dashboard. And I often get asked questions on like, when do I use an Azure Sentinel or a log analytics workbook versus an Azure dashboard? So as you can kind of see the context here with workbooks, they're really used based on contextual solution, Cloud App Security or Intune or Office Activity. Where an Azure dashboard comes into play is I can actually take different tiles or views or grid outputs from different workbooks and have all of those in one place. So this is an example of what one of my landing dashboards looks like, and you can have multiples. In this case, you can see that I've got, when I come in the morning, I look at our labeling activity, our MFA registration trends, the top domains queried, detection methods for Office ATP, DLP matches, and then our top Intune events. For me, I'm pulling in different little pieces from a whole bunch of different workbooks, and that's really one way. And again, the cool thing about an Azure dashboard is it is going to pass through the criteria for the time duration in the search. So again, if I modify this, if the queries support that, which you can write in them, you'll see that it'll automatically adjust the time slicer against that. And then also what I love is auto refresh. So I can even have this as a standing dashboard, and this will automatically refresh on whatever given interval I want. Okay, so let's go back and talk about one other way to take these logs out, and I'm going to close the last 3 or 4 minutes with questions here. So one of the things that I talked about as we were going through today was different ways to consume these logs. And one of the methods I kind of glazed over, was being able to take these events out into a solution like Power BI. So again, separating the 3 really quick. Working in Kusto is obviously Kusto. I can work with the raw data. Working in an Azure Sentinel workbook allows me to have a curated solution-based view. An Azure dashboard allows me a curated view of multiple solutions. And again, those are all refreshed on demand or instantly. Now, Power BI dashboards fit in a bit of a different area because most of the time, Power BI dashboards are not going to be real time. And they're definitely meant for not as deep of a pivot or a drill down capability as a workbook or as a dashboard. So when we talk about this, it's mostly meant at high level green, yellow, red type views. It's meant at consumption from an executive, but we want to have this data so that an exec or a leader doesn't have to go into an Azure portal. And that's really where Power BI comes into play. So one question you may be asking yourself, well, Rich, how do I get that data out? It's actually very easy, and it was hidden in kind of what I showed earlier today. So one of the options you have here is called export, and you can export to mQuery or Power BI here. So when I go ahead and choose this, I already exported one. You'll see that looks like something like this, and it's really functionally just querying the API and returning the results in a somewhat normalized form. What's great about this is I can actually Control A and Control C this, literally taking no differences or no changes whatsoever. And I can actually open up Power BI Desktop, just what I prefer here. I can actually go ahead and say, let's go ahead and do transform data. And I can do new source blank and click this little advanced editor button right here. And I can Control A, Control V, and make no changes. And what you will see is, as long as I'm authenticated, which I already am, you'll see that those results now get returned within this within the query response for Power BI. And when I close that, that then applies, and I can then create visualizations on top of that. So let's fast forward a little bit because I just wanted to show how you get the data in. And let's actually look at what one of those dashboards could look like. So this is actually an example. And again, this is up on my GitHub repository. And what I'm doing is I'm actually querying that Teams data parser I have. So I'm essentially pulling in all the Teams data to Power BI here. But what that allows me to do is I can use that raw data and I can create custom views for statistics, for admin activity, for external users, for suspicious activity. And really the saving grace here is that I can bring this all out into publishing this online, and then makes that consumable by anyone. And again, because this is all based off of that data and refreshed once a day or once an hour or whatever you choose, I can easily pivot around the different data sets, and I can start to go look at activity for myself, and then all the other views dynamically change on that page. Or again, I can go over to admin activities, and if I wanted to, I can add a search function or click on who added tabs and sort that by others, etc. So again, really under talked about function here, but probably one of the most powerful. And really, all of these represent different ways to consume events as it pertains to data within Azure Sentinel. We do have about 3 minutes or so left, so I don't see too many questions in the chat window. I'm going to go through them really quickly, but please, if you have any questions, feel free to toss them back in chat. Looks like we already published a couple here. One of the questions I see is specifically around how some of that Power BI access works with the APIs. So again, you don't necessarily need to work with the APIs or set up an app registration for any of what I just showed to work. As long as you're a user with the right permissions in that log analytics or that Sentinel subscription or the Sentinel instance, you will have the rights to query that data just as you could within the portal. So no additional reason to set up a dedicated app registration with a app ID, client secret, etc. Another great question, specifically about my GitHub repository. I will go ahead and publish that link out in chat here for everyone as well. Thanks for asking. All right, I will do one last call for questions. We're just about the top of the hour here. All right, one last slide before we wrap here. And it's really about any potential next steps. I do appreciate everyone joining the last three. Hopefully, if you've been able to make them all or view the recordings. One of the things I will call out as a final next step is there are Microsoft Cloud Accelerators for Azure Sentinel. So if you are a managed customer with Microsoft today, there are ways to help come in and conduct kind of workshops and even POCs. Also, Netrix does offer managed Sentinel services. Happy to reach out to myself or my team for discussion. And then again, this has been a great webinar series. If you're looking to really bring this into action, my team can also be leveraged for POCs, pilots, deployments, and obviously managing this ongoing as well. Again, really appreciate everyone's time. Been a great session, great series. Appreciate the marketing team putting the effort into this, and hopefully everyone found this valuable. Feel free to find me on LinkedIn, Twitter, or on my GitHub, and hopefully everyone have a great rest of your day.